Welcome to JHS Metalworks. In the next video on the Hasegawa Lamborghini Miura, we'll be focusing on the front suspension to wrap up the chassis work. Welcome to my workbench. Let's get started. Alright, so we're going to start out looking at some parts. I have made a second attempt at the hood slats for the front of the car. This is just the driver's side. I've not even started the passenger side one yet, but this is a much better attempt. The first few are pretty messy, but I've already acetoned them once and I got them out of order, so I can't really get them back into order, so I don't want to risk losing a bunch of the tiny little slats. Also, I did lose one and I didn't realize I'd lost one until near the end, and I found it inside the bottom of this jar that I was keeping all the parts in. So it ended up going on the very end, so you can definitely see that it's out of alignment. I ended up having to cut it, and yeah. It's not perfect, but it's better. It's much better than the first attempt. So for me, I'm calling that a win. I just have to figure out how I'm going to paint it and get it to look correct, because it needs to be black, but I don't want to gum up in between the slats with like primer or something. So that's next on my list of things to try and figure out, but those are going to sit right in. Those should sit right in about like that. This is honestly the most complicated piece of photo etch I've ever built, with the smallest pieces, so I'm calling that good. Gonna jump forward in time a bit here. It is the next evening, and I have finished up the, well, that's the original set. I finished up the second set of slats, and these went much better than the first set. Once you learn and get the hang of it. So the way I did them was I approached it from the back. I started at one end and I just worked my way down. I would take my tweezers and one slat at a time, and I would get the slat seated into this frame, because it's a rectangular frame. Get my finger behind it to hold it in place. So just take a tiny bit of CA glue on the tip of this punch, and I would go in there and I would just dab the CA glue on each side and then let it sit. Got everything lined up, made sure everything was sitting straight, or as straight as I could get it. Let it set for a couple of minutes, and then I would move on to the next slat. And as you can see, that one came out much cleaner than the first set. It's a learning process. After we get these painted up with some black, these will get glued in and they will sit just like that. And from underneath it, you should be able to see the fuel tank and the fuel lid. Now we're going to go back in time, back to finish up the rest of the parts. Next piece we have is pretty much the upper control arms. This is all one big chunk. It's going to basically sit There's 4 holes in there. They line up with 4 little nubs, and they form your control arms. I'm not too concerned with this because this is not going to be seen. You have this cross member, goes up at the top of that, and that cross member is going to hold your shocks up at the top. They go into that little groove. Basically going to tuck in just like that. Speaking of the shocks, I did go ahead and rebuild the shocks because these shocks are just perfect for rebuilding. They asked to be rebuilt. And they look great, and they're kind of easier to work with sometimes when you rebuild them. these have more detail on them on the heads, so I just went ahead and painted those. You'll never see them again, so I just thought they looked cool with the little silver nubs on them. Of these parts, I don't know exactly what they are. They're supposed to be semi-gloss black. I left them on the sprues so it would have the part numbers on them. Make it easy to identify. But they basically are going to go in here, and so the part's going to go like that. So I felt like adding a little color to them, making them aluminum would just give me a little bit of color on the underside of the car. So I went ahead and made them aluminum and just painted some details in the semi-gloss black. We have our uprights. Again, we did those in aluminum. Our hole in there for our poly caps. We have our tie rod. So I ended up having to strip this and repaint it because the first time it just didn't come out well. Painted the whole thing semi-gloss black first. I then tried to cover the boot areas and spray the aluminum, and the masking just really wasn't good. So the edges got silver. So I went and brushed over them, and LP5 comes out really glossy if you brush paint it, especially if you get it on thick at all. Maybe if you can keep it real thin, you'll be fine, but it looked like gloss black to me. So I stripped it down completely and resprayed it, and the second time I sprayed the aluminum first and then masked off all the aluminum and sprayed the semi-gloss on the boots, and it came out much nicer. And we have our brakes. So I did these in zero paint semi-gloss black. I then masked off the calipers and sprayed the entire disc in LP48 sparkling silver. That nice bright shiny metallic. And then the boots are Alclad steel. So you'll see the backs, maybe. But for the most part, you're not going to see the fronts. But I still wanted them painted up to look nice. So that covers all of our parts. Let's go ahead and get it assembled. Alright, so you may hear some noise in the background. My daughter's playing a video game. It's our night off. I'm not going to make her sit and play in silence so I can record. So if you hear anything blowing up or dying or whatnot, everything's okay. First thing we're going to do, get these parts on. This goes under the control arm. There's a small little hole that end clicks into. And this piece goes up to that right there. My glue is getting kind of old. It's a little thick. That down in that hole. Now the way these sit, these uprights sit with the link for the tie rod pointing down and in the front. I find it's easier to assemble these and then mount them. Next, you're supposed to install your shocks, which I may or may not do in the correct order. Let's up this with a wide end back towards our interior, and see that's just not working out for me. So these ends point down. We'll line up our holes. Our uprights in. We want to make sure that we get all 4 of the located pins clipped firmly into place. Our shock, and we assemble our shock, and we'll try this shock again. We have the bottom of our shock seated. Get some super glue applied to the locating points on the chassis. At the bottom of this piece, that's where your shocks are going to sit in, and then there's a bar that runs along the bottom, and that locates into that slot. We'll locate our shock. Locate our other shock. And then we're going to press this down and try to get it to locate. There we go. You'll notice I put no glue on the shocks at all. That lets them go in really clean. I don't have to worry that I glued them at the wrong angle and things won't line up, and then I've got to break them back loose again, try to line them back up again. The shocks themselves, because I modified the shocks, and the shocks are actually compressible, and the shocks are just slightly taller than the part should be, like maybe a 0.5 millimeter or so, but it's enough that the compression from the shock itself will actually hold itself into place. Drop our polycap into place. We want to look at our brake assemblies. There's a small tab angled back on the bottom. There's a large tab up at the top. If I flip this around, that's going to put the small tab at the top. That's the wrong one. And I like to get just a little on this very edge. Be careful not to get any on the polycap area. We're going to double check our location. And that's got our front suspension. Everything installed nice and clean. Everything's perfectly seated. And we're going to call that a night. If you enjoyed the video, please hit the like button. Also, feel free to leave comments, feedback, critique, or anything else in the comment section below. I enjoy interacting with all my viewers in the comment section and try to reply to all the comments I receive. If you want to catch future videos, please consider subscribing to my channel and make sure you click the bell notification icon so you can be notified when I upload new videos. As always, thank you for watching, keep modeling, and have a great day.